Hello and welcome back to part 2 of my look through this SFX magazine special edition from 2001. In the first video I looked through their lists of the best SF movies and TV shows of all time, and you can find a link to that in the description. In this video I'll be looking through their lists of the top SF novels and comics of all time, and giving you my opinions on all of them. So let's get started. This list misses out anything published since 1990, so it might seem even more dated than the other ones, but there's still plenty of good stuff on there. At 20, Guards Guards by Terry Pratchett. If you're only going to have one Pratchett on the list, this is certainly a good choice. I would argue that Night Watch is probably a better novel, but this one is certainly more accessible. At 19, Gateway by Frederick Pohl. I've read this and also the first of the sequels. It's a great book and I'd definitely like to read it again. And hopefully they'll make a TV version someday, so it becomes better known. At 18, Consider Phlebas by Ian M. Banks. The first of the Culture books. Maybe not the best. I would certainly rank Use of Weapons above it, and possibly some of the others. But you can't go wrong with any of them, really. At 17, Sighteen by C.J. Cherryh. I have not read this one, but it does sound interesting. 16, Bridge of Birds by Barry Hugas. Haven't read it and never heard of it outside of this list. 15, The Affirmation by Christopher Priest. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Christopher Priest. His novels are always an incredible read, and this is definitely one of his best. 14, Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. I've not read this one. 13, The Three Stigmata of Palmer Aldrich by Philip K. Dick. I've read a few of Philip K. Dick's novels, but not this one, so I might have to check this out. At 12, The Owl Service by Alan Garner. I may have read this one when I was a child, but I have no memory of it. I do remember the Alan Garner novels that I read were always a bit too ambiguous for my tastes. I could never really understand what the hell was going on. So this is probably another one of those. At 11, The Star's My Destination by Alfred Bester. I have read this one, and it's very good. And I wouldn't mind reading it again. At 10, Rogue Moon by Algis Budrys. I have not read this one, but it does sound really interesting, so I might have to check it out. At 9, Blood Music by Greg Bear. I have read this. It's not one of his best, I think. I prefer Eon and the sequel Eternity. At 8, Dune by Frank Herbert. Yeah, obviously a classic. Not much you can say about it. Possibly deserves to be higher on the list. At 7, Gormenghast by Mervyn Peake. Yep, another excellent book, definitely deserves to be on the list. At 6, Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin. I read the Earthsea books when I was a kid. It's been a long time, but I definitely remember enjoying them. I think they were probably some of the first fantasy novels I ever read, in fact. At 5, Pavan by Keith Roberts. I have read this, not really a fan. It's alright, but nothing special. At 4, Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Yeah, again, what can you say about this? It's an out-and-out classic. It's going to be in any list like this. At 3, The City of the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke. Yeah, I've read a few of Clarke's novels, but not this one. So maybe I'll give it a try. At 2, Little Big by John Crowley. No, haven't read this one, and I'm not really familiar with it. But if it's this high up the list, I guess it must be good. And at 1, The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. Yes, I have read this several times over, and I'm not sure I really understood it. But it's a mesmerising read, and definitely worth the #1 spot. So that's 12 out of 20 that I've read, and a lot more that I would like to. I wouldn't know where to start with making my own list like this, to be honest. I guess I'd want a few more recent books like House of Leaves, Hyperion, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. But yeah, if you insist on being before 1990, then this list is pretty good. Finally, the comics. And I've read a lot more of these than I have the books. Mainly through digital sales, where you could get the best comics of all time dirt cheap. Which doesn't happen so often with books. Anyway, at 20 we have Kingdom Come by Mark Waid and Alex Ross. I have read this, it's okay, not really one of my favourites. At 19 it's Preacher by Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon. It's rather too extreme for my tastes, but I did read all of it, so that must count for something. At 18 it's Spider-Man, the original one by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Yeah, I've read a lot of the early Marvel books through Marvel Unlimited, and this is certainly one of the best ones of the 1960s. Classic stuff, absolutely. At 17 it's Sandman by Neil Gaiman. I would say this is far too low on the list. This is one of my all-time favourite comics. I've read it many times, and I will read it many times in future. At 16, The Authority. This is one of those books that must have been amazing to read at the time, completely different from anything else. But by the time I got around to reading it, it wasn't quite so unique. And to me it wasn't as good as The Ultimates, which came later from the same team. But at the time it must have been amazing. At 15, it's the X-Men, specifically the Chris Claremont and John Byrne run. Yes, I would absolutely agree with this. Big X-Men fan, particularly the Chris Claremont era, which is basically a decade. But I would argue that Grant Morrison's New X-Men also deserves to be on a list like this. At 14, Justice League of America by Grant Morrison. I'm a big fan of a lot of Morrison's work, but for some reason I haven't got around to reading this one. But certainly works like Admiral Man and Doom Patrol definitely deserve to be on a best of all time list. So I will have to get around to reading his JLA run at some point. At 13 it's Starman by James Robinson. I just made a whole video about this literally last week, so if you just go back in my timeline, you'll see a whole 10 minutes of my thoughts on Starman. At 12, Batman the Killing Joke by Alan Moore and Brian Bolland. Yeah, this is another one of those which at the time would have been absolutely groundbreaking, but by the time we got around to reading it, it was just like any other Batman comic, so it didn't really seem particularly special. But the artwork just still stands up as being absolutely amazing. At 11, Planetary by Warren Ellis and John Cassaday. I have read this and really enjoyed it, but I'd probably like to read it again, as it does reference a lot of old comics, which I probably wasn't that familiar with at the time. At 10, Justice League International by Keith Giffen and J.M. DeMatteis. Yes, I read as much of this as was reprinted in trade paperback form, and I would like to read more of it, so hopefully they'll get round to reprinting the rest of it someday. 9, it's V for Vendetta by Alan Moore and David Lloyd. I didn't read this until after I'd already seen the movie, and to be honest I thought the movie was better. I'm aware this is not a popular opinion, but that's just how it goes. At 8, The Fantastic Four by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Yep, again another classic 60s run. Every issue's bursting with classic concepts that went on to be part of the Marvel Universe, and still are to this day. At 7, Captain Britain by Alan Moore and Alan Davis. Yeah, this is one of those characters who's had lots of different runs over the years. I've read most of them. This is probably the best, although I do very much enjoy Excalibur as well. At 6, DR and Quidge by Alan Moore and Alan Davis. Yeah, I love Alan Moore's stuff, but this one has passed me by, so I will definitely have to check it out at some point. At 5, Batman the Dark Knight Returns. Yeah, this is one of the first trade paperbacks I ever got. It hasn't aged as well as some, but you can't deny it's been very influential over the years. At 4, Batman Year One by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. This is another one that I didn't read until many years after the fact, and by then it just felt like just another Batman story. but at the time I can see it would have been very different. At 3, Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. Yeah, no complaints here, total classic. Deserves to be in the top 3 of any list. At 2, Miracle Man by Alan Moore, Gary Leach and Alan Davis. Yeah, I didn't read this until a couple of years ago, when Marvel finally brought it out in collected format. It's still an excellent read, but I personally rank it below Watchmen. And at number 1, we have Frank Miller's Daredevil. I read this quite recently on Marvel Unlimited, and it's certainly way ahead of anything Marvel were doing at the time. I probably wouldn't rank it quite as high as this, but it's still definitely worth a read. So that's only 2 of the entire list that I haven't read. Yeah, I'm quite proud of that. It's a decent list overall. Sandman and Watchmen definitely deserve to be up there, as well as all the classic Marvel runs. Personally, I would add a few more recent works like The Wicked and the Divine, 100 Bullets, Why the Last Man, that kind of thing. But otherwise, it's a perfectly good list. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing. And I may well look through some more of my old magazines in the future. Till then, goodbye.